Okay, thanks very much, Elaine. Can I just check, is my screen showing properly? Yeah, I'm sure Kieran would be shouting at me if it wasn't. Okay, well, I'm going to talk to you about my personal collection this morning, and really with the idea that as biological recorders, we collect specimens and we collect them for various reasons. And it's worth thinking ahead as to what you're actually going to do with those specimens, because as Elaine has said, I'm most ancient and decrepit, and I have just retired as Vice County Recorder. So that's made me think, what do I do with all the specimens that I have? Okay, so planning ahead with personal collections. And although I was down as representing BSBI, I don't really represent anybody nowadays, so retired layabout will have to do. So back in the olden days, when I started botanizing, and you can see those interesting things on the backs of those young ladies that I like to think of as Sue Townsend and me. Those are vasculums, and that's what you would put your specimens in, and possibly keep your sandwiches in as well. So I'm afraid, I mean, you'd never guess it if you knew me, but I was a complete and utter nerd child, and I had a plant press, and I started collecting specimens when I was about 12. I think I was a little bit younger than 12 there, but that's me raiding rare ladies' mantles in Cheddar Gorge when I was about 7. But I started collecting plants and pressing them as an alternative to having friends. And those are some of the specimens that I pressed and kept. And as you can see, they are in a photo album, essentially, which at the time seemed like the most brilliant idea. And it has been fantastic for keeping the color of the plants. And it's great, except that you'll never be able to remove them because it's sticky and the specimens will become compromised if you try and take the sticky layer off. But they're still very pretty to look at. So those are specimens that I'm not going to talk about today. Hopefully the ones I'm going to talk about might in some world be a little bit more useful. So the collections I am talking about are these. This is a glimpse into my boudoir, ladies and gentlemen. So not everyone gets that. And these are the white display folders that contain just over 1,600 specimens that I've collected over the years with the help of, he has to get a mention, my ever-loving ex-husband, Alex Lockton. Some of them are rather lovely, I think, even the aquatic plants. And this is hornwort. And so these are specimens that have been properly pressed and dried, but for any of the NATSCA members amongst you will recoil in horror when I say that they are mounted on just ordinary A4 paper. They're not on anything archive quality, and they are in little plastic pockets. And they're held down very loosely with a tiny bit of tape, just so they don't move around too much. They were curated until about 8 years ago. They had a chest freezer in which they would get frozen regularly to keep the populations of wee beasties down. But other than that, they no longer have any curation at all. Although when I went through them to count them for this talk, I was quite surprised at how good they were. There were no apparent book lice, silverfish, mold, anything like that. So that made me feel a bit better. Aquatic plants, in my opinion, are among the most difficult to press, but you can still make quite beautiful specimens out of a pondweed, and this is bluntleaf pondweed from Bowmere Pool, and this is actually one of my favourite voucher specimens because I think it looks quite pretty. And so why do you make voucher specimens? Well, when I taught biological recording for, gosh, what seemed like decades, I think it was, for botanical students, I would actually teach them to mount specimens just on A4 paper in a little plastic pocket. And that was a really easy way to go to a referee in the post. And as you can see here, this has come back in the post with lots of referees' comments on it. And this is Chris Preston, who's the Pondweed Supremo and wrote the Pondweed Handbook, telling me that it was in fact Potamogeton freezii. Even when you send an absolute hideous mess like that, I was so apologetic for sending that to him. It just didn't press very well, but amazingly enough, he said it was easy enough to identify. So for some specimens, you have to get determinations for them, or confirmations. And whatever taxonomic group it is that you tackle, you'll know this, that you have to send a glued beetle or a pinned fly or a spider in a tube of something toxic off to the referee to get some confirmation. And I suppose it's what you do with that afterwards. This is what I'm trying to ask people to think about. And this is one of the few that I actually failed to get a determination on. And you can see here it's a pondweed. Well, if you know what pondweed looks like, you can see it's a pondweed. And this is, well, it's either least pondweed or it's small pondweed. The names are great. You can see why people love aquatic plants. And so it's either Potamogeton buctoldii or Pusillus, and that requires the very delicate dissection of the stipule. And when the leaves are only, well, they're less than 1 millimetre wide, it's a really, really fiddly job. So you can see why sometimes they just stay in the folder. Although this was the only one that I didn't get done. I used to send them to Chris Preston so that he could do the delicate dissection of the stipules. And of course, he rapidly sussed this and said, just get them under a microscope and do the dissection yourself. And then you can tell me whether it's Pusillus or buctoldii. Fair enough. Okay. Not all of them look pretty. This is not a handsome voucher specimen, but it's quite an important one because this was the first county record. So as county recorder, John Clayfield, who's a fabulous and prolific recorder in Shropshire, handed me this rather sad looking bit of bromus. And I thought, oh gosh, I'm sure that is Bromus seculinus. That's fabulous. So it just got popped in a plastic pocket, and I got that confirmed by Clive Stace. And so biological recording, job done. Is it pretty? No. This is a prettier specimen. This is Festuca rubra, subspecies arctica. And Arthur Copping, who was a fabulous gratis referee. I went to Shetland with him, which was quite a privilege. And sometimes the help that you get from referees is absolutely outstanding. So there's no little scribble on the sheet saying, oh yes, this is subspecies arctica. You get a whole letter, not just one side. Turn that over, and there's yet another side devoted to your specimen of Festuca rubra subspecies arctica. So referees are fabulous people to engage with, and sending your specimens to them is the way to get engaged. It's a great way of learning. Some referees just put a little what's called a debt slip in there, and you can see one at the bottom from Laurie Spalton. And sometimes your determinations can be a little bit of a mystery. I can remember sending what I thought was the first record of Juncus scoliosus for Shropshire off to the referee, and it came back, and I looked at it and thought, well, it's just signed by Catface, which was rather interesting. I thought, I'm sure I don't know anyone called Catface, and then just realised that it had to be Stace. So Clive, sorry, you've affectionately been known as Catface ever since. Possibly not to his face, though. And sometimes your specimens carry a really interesting story. This is a rather unprepossessing grass. This is Polypogon viridis, which is water bent. What can I tell you about water bent? Well, I suppose what makes it special is that it's the fastest spreading alien plant in Britain. And many years ago, Rob Stokes, who's a fantastic plant and bird recorder, he brought me something in a Tesco's carrier bag. Other supermarkets are available. And he said, what do you think this is? And I said, oh gosh, it looks a bit like water bent. And so we sat in my back garden having a look at this water bent and having a cup of tea. And anyway, he left the bag with me, and off he went. And I think because it wasn't in Shropshire, his specimen, he'd found it in Birmingham in the Black Country. I kind of thought, oh well, in that case, I'll just pop it in the compost. But a couple of months later, Polypogon viridis pops up in great profusion in my backyard, and I thought, oh, okay, that's interesting. I walked into town and thought, there's Polypogon viridis all along the streets. Now, it hadn't been recorded in Shropshire up to this point. And so it was a little experiment. Alex Lockton and I followed, we knew where Rob lived, and so we walked to his house and actually followed this trail of Polypogon viridis, where it had very gradually seeded itself through little holes in the carrier bag. So this was our first county record for water bent. And so sometimes when you're looking back through specimens, as I had quite a nostalgic trip, flicking through all the folders, I could see that this was one that instantly provoked a memory. So what did I collect? Well, that's how my folders are labelled. Some of them are taxonomic, some of them aren't. And I think the greatest preponderance is probably Carex, sedges, and then after that, water plants, pondweeds. I know they're also water plants, but they get put in a separate folder, and grasses. And then there are trees as well. So why do I separate out trees? I mean, taxonomically, they're incredibly diverse, but they are in groups that allowed me, if I was teaching an identification course on a particular group, I could grab that folder off the shelf and I could take it with me and use the examples in there as part of the teaching experience. So what is my problem? Well, quite a lot of people have asked that. My problem with the specimens is that I'd quite like my shelf space back, as I've just retired as county recorder. And the problem is nobody really wants my specimens, which makes me very sad. But the embarrassing thing is, so all of you curators sitting there in the audience, in the fabulous surroundings, the Museum of Natural History at Oxford, I was actually a curator. I curated BIRM, which was the University of Birmingham Herbarium, and I curated that for years. That was an absolutely thankless task. I had no resources and I had no space, and it got bunged in an asbestos-filled corner of the physics basement. So it was very difficult to look after. So I knew how to handle herbarium sheets and to create proper archive quality herbarium sheets, but most of my collection was not archive quality. It was in these plastic wallets. But remember, the A4 size samples are easier to send to referees rather than a full-size herbarium sheet. The white display folders, you can just grab them off the shelf. And of course, if you do make your own archive quality specimen, with the idea that you are going to submit your herbarium to a proper herbarium one day, and that they'll hopefully accession it. Different herbaria use different techniques for mounting, so they might not particularly appreciate them mounted in your particular way. So if they were glued and sent to Edinburgh, then I think Edinburgh sew most of their specimens. At Birmingham we taped, but a lot of the specimens were also glued. And of course, I assumed that I would be at Birmingham forever and that my retirement would be lurking in the university herbarium and gradually mounting all of my specimens and accessioning them that way. Could I repatriate any of my specimens? Because not all of them are for Shetland. And in fact, 10% of my specimens are, 10% of my specimens are for Shetland. They're not all for Shropshire. And in fact, I'd say that only about half of my specimens are for Shropshire. So I could repatriate them. So what are the other options for my collection? Well, I guess that ideally I need to find a needy herbarium curator who would say, oh yes, we'd love to have the wild herbarium, you know, because obviously in my megalomaniac dreams there's the Sloan collection, there'll be the wild collection, obviously, but I'm the only one that has that dream, apparently. I've tried to palm them off on other botanists saying, these are really useful folders, would you like to use them? And they say, yeah, they take up quite a lot of space though. I could try telling my children that they are worth a fortune and that they need to look after them, but sadly they do know the truth. I could divide them up into each vice county and I could send them to the vice county recorder, and suddenly that wouldn't be my problem. I could remortgage my house and pay a herbarium curator to take them on, basically give them a grant to accession them into their collection. But at my time of life, there is gin to be bought, so I don't think I'm going to be remortgaging my house. So do I have any messages for people who have specimens lurking in their own collections? Think ahead, decide why you're collecting, and in particular who you're collecting for. And I think this is an issue more for botanical collectors rather than entomologists. Make sure you know how to make archive quality specimens. So if you manage to do that, then you should be able to provide a collection that is useful. The one thing that I will say, having listened to the fabulous talks yesterday about these old collections and old collectors, the moth collections and the botanical collections that have been painstakingly digitized. The good news, I guess, is that all of the data from all of these specimens has been digitized. So all of the records are in the system, they're in the BSBI database, they are on the NBN Atlas, and basically they are where they should be. And I think that that's the most important thing, because one of the biggest problems that curators have is getting the data from their collections digitized. So that bit has already been done. So if there are any needy herbarium curators sitting there in the audience and they're thinking, oh, I'd love to have the wild collection. Think of the kudos, gosh, just get in touch with me, please. Thank you very much for listening. That's all I've got to say.
Beautiful, thank you, Sarah. We haven't had any questions in the chat. We've had quite a few comments. So we've got Laura McCoy, who I believe has something to do with historic collections anyway. She says that there now seems to be a big disconnect with the skill of identifying and the skill of preparing, and that most historic collections seem to enjoy the act of preserving, and it was all part of the process, and it's all a lovely thing. And you can tell, actually, because you look at them, you're like, this looks like it's just walked across the page, or it's just fallen into the book, which I think is a really, really valid point. And yeah, and nowadays the specimens that are sometimes given aren't as lovingly looked after or as well prepared. And in his comment as well, it says that if they're prepared well, like you say, if they're prepared in an archive way, that it helps with their longevity and also their use as well. As I'm a beetle person and I have lots of beetles, and I can definitely say that a well-prepared specimen is worth 100 really bad ones, because you can see all the bits you need and stuff like that. And yeah, it's a really, really valid point. I think a few other comments as well in the chat were sort of we're talking about that some museums will have a preference, some don't, some will take whatever they can get. So yeah, very much so. So hopefully there will be someone out there that really, really wants that collection, because it's a really good resource. And even if it's just as a teaching collection, which are hard, you know, they're hard to build up. So yeah, if so, hopefully we can find a wonderful place for it, that it does its job. I don't know if anyone has any questions within the theatre itself.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I think we've got time for one question. We all enjoyed Catface very much in the audience here, by the way. They did at home as well. Yes. Martin's running now with a microphone. I'm going to repeat all the questions because people online can't hear.
Probably more a comment than a question. As a museum curator, many years dealing with entomology, I've dealt with all sorts of collections being offered to us as a museum in different situations, from rescuing collections after someone's death, or being offered collections after someone's demise. I think it's very important to build up a relationship, possibly with museums, or whoever you think is going to host a collection. But dealing with a collection recently, in the last year, one aspect that's going to be important in the future is leaving your passwords to computers. Because there was a particular situation I'm thinking of, the recorder of Heteroptera had left a range of computers but no passwords. Luckily, his nephew is a computer person and has got into them. But I think the digital archive is going to be very important in the future to be secured, as well as specimens. And also, I mean, there are stories about families objecting over many years to their partners or relations, entomological or whatever activities, and it all goes in a skip, making actually proper instructions in a will. And I've also heard, I'm sure others have heard, also of people making a will with an entomological executor that will deal with such scientific activity. So not so much a question. I mean, I know exactly the situation, and if I drop dead tomorrow, it would be a hell of a mess.
Hopefully you could mostly hear that online. I think the major points from Mike was to leave your passwords if you've got a digital archive of your own, and try and build up a good relationship with the museums that exist. Did you have any comment? Did you hear that all, Sarah? Do you have any comments to respond?
I did, and yes, I was sitting there thinking, oh God, how many fellow curators have I really pissed off? And that's a major issue. But yes, whether they'll end up in a skip, I've actually taken specific bits out of my will with respect to that, but I've got a couple of fantastic executors who I know will make sure that all the good bits go to the right places. So, but hopefully that's not going to happen for a while.
No, of course not.
There is gin to be drunk.
Okay, so I think we better move on because we are running a little bit behind. So thank you very much, Sarah.